All right. Hello, folks, and welcome to this, what might just be a longer hurricane season short summary. We are going to be looking over a pretty notable one, the 1982 East Central Pacific hurricane season. Both of these regions, the central is technically separate from the East Pacific. They're two separate basins. However, they're under the same jurisdiction, and quite a few storms cross into there and form there and are classified just under the East Pacific season on Wikipedia. So I am going to include both of them here for formality purposes, but generally you can also just call this the East Pacific hurricane season. So, that out of the way, we see a number of storm tracks, and that is shown by our chronological order here. Just a little bit of storms. This was obviously above normal, with 23 storms, 12 hurricanes, and 5 major hurricanes. This would produce a seasonal ACE of 161, which is pretty high above the average. The average, for anyone wondering, is anywhere from 86, 85 to 116. So just a little bit. Now, we would also see 4 storms, so a total of 3 storms, 1 hurricane, form in the Central Pacific. At the time, this was a record. This would be beaten by 2015, however, so this record would stand for a fair bit. Depending on which Wikipedia page you look at, you will see both 1,629 deaths and $834 million in damage. That is on the direct page talking about specifically the 82 season, or if you look at the listings of every single documented East East Pacific season, you will see 1,987 deaths and 1.2 billion US dollars in damage. So it does depend there, which is a little odd. Those numbers are relatively far apart on both the deaths and dollars in damage. So whichever one that you want to go with. With that being said, though, we are going to start off with Hurricane Daniel. Daniel here is pretty interesting as it originally formed as TD 8E, so Tropical Depression 8 East, on the 7th of July, becoming a tropical storm the next day, and then a hurricane the day after that, so we are on the 9th of July now. Daniel would take at least, thankfully, until the 11th to peak, reaching 115 miles per hour. Now, interestingly, we have wind data on Daniel, but no pressure data. Trust me on this. Either I missed somewhere where Daniel has, where pressure data was recorded for Daniel, or I honestly didn't find any pressure points for Daniel. I believe that this is the very first notable I've covered to not have any pressure data on it, but I digress. It made me very upset, though. Daniel would take a while to dissipate, doing so on the 22nd in the Alanui Haha channel. I do hope I pronounced that right because I did try and practice. And due to this, Daniel never made landfall on Hawaii at all. Daniel would also cause minor, if any at all, because I didn't find any records of impacts on the islands of Maui and Hawaii. Hawaii, in this case, referencing the Big Island. So we have no totals here. Daniel was pretty frustrating to research, all things considered, because we have a really well defined track here. It's not just a straight shot. There are some dips in it, but it's not just a gentle curve. Again, there's some dips. But other than that, data was hard to come by. The same can be kind of said for Olivia, which was recognized on the 18th of September by a ship report, actually, just stating a tropical cyclone in the area. Olivia would become a tropical storm that day, and then become a hurricane only around 24 hours after being named, so approximately on the 19th to the 20th. Olivia would peak on just the 21st of September, reaching 145 miles per hour at an unknown pressure. Because this still frustrates me, I could not find any pressure points for Olivia as well. Now, at this point, Olivia is trekking around a high pressure situated along southern Baja California, which would make it so that as a tropical system, it would not make landfall at all. Olivia would therefore, due to curving around the high pressure, dissipate on the 25th, only 400 kilometers to the west southwest of San Diego. Now, I say only, despite 400 kilometers indeed being a large distance, but relatively, that's pretty close, all things considered, you know. Due to the remnants of Olivia making landfall, there would be some pretty major crop damage in California, with some especially high rainfall along the northern Sierra Nevada, and there would be widespread flooding, although isolated to the Salt Lake area in Utah, where we would actually see the maximum rainfall in the United States from Olivia reaching 7.41 inches of rain. Again, widespread floodings limited to the Salt Lake area. Olivia is ultimately responsible for 3 indirect deaths and approximately 475 million US dollars in damage. Paul is a really, really interesting storm here. Paul was first acknowledged as a tropical depression on the 15th of September. Tracking began around I think the 9th to the 11th of September, if not earlier than that. We see Paul make landfall around, I believe it's El Salvador. Apologies, I'm not fully there on my Central American geography, but then also retrace its steps back out into the Pacific. Paul would become a tropical depression again on the 18th and then again on the 24th. But a little bit of a rewind here. Already upon making landfall, Paul had become El Salvador's worst natural disaster since 1965, having already killed 1,000 people and flooding San Salvador by up to 8 feet in water, which is absolutely insane. That is that is crazy. Paul would finally become a tropical storm around the 26th and become a hurricane by the 27th, where it also began curving northwards. At this point, this high pressure along the southern Baja California is dissipated, obviously, as Paul would be trekking around it if it were still there. Paul would peak around the 28th to 29th of September, reaching 110 miles per hour, and yet again, no pressure that I could find. The season was very upsetting, yet also weirdly informative at the same time. Paul made landfall close to La Paz, Baja California at peak strength, and also landfell near Los Mochis at 100 miles per hour. The the life of Paul abruptly ends by all sources that I could find on the 30th, upon practically upon making landfall, which I find almost completely impossible. No matter how weak a storm is, there's usually a little bit of inland track, especially since Paul is a Category 2, but I digress. Paul is responsible for 1,625 deaths, for causing 668 people to go missing, and 520 million US dollars in damage. Iowa. Now, folks, Iowa is a very interesting storm as well. Iowa was officially recognized as a tropical storm on the 19th of November, which you might be saying, are you sure it's November? Trust me, I am sure. This system formed so late because warm waters were still available due to a record-setting El Nino, which I'll talk about a little bit. The system would become a hurricane on the 23rd, and Iowa would peak late on the 23rd, reaching 90 miles per hour at a pressure of 968 millibars. Now, folks, I know that pressure isn't necessarily a needed statistic, but it is still nice to know, which is why not having pressure data frustrates me, so you know. Iowa would become the first tropical system to majorly affect Hawaii within a quarter of a century. Iowa would then dissipate on the 25th north of the islands due to unsustainable conditions. Most tragically, Iowa would cause the loss of the last female. Oh God, I practiced this and I'm still gonna butcher it. I'm so sorry. The Kauai Oo. I'm so sorry. This would mark the very first and so far only extinction of an entire species of an avi- of a bird in the modern era. So since around 1500 CE, Iowa is responsible for 1 direct and 3 indirect deaths, as well as $312 million in damage. Now, this season, especially on paper, you're like, well, yeah, it was active. There were some storms. There was Paul and Olivia. But what really struck me as surprising was the very, very large and also very, very little amounts of data that we got. For Daniel, it was a pain researching. However, Iowa and Olivia and Paul, I only needed 1 or 2 sources on. Also, this year, 1982, was the first year of storms forming from the international date line to 140 degrees west, that being the region of the Central Pacific, that were to be given Hawaiian names. So from the Hawaiian alphabet, that is why our last system was called Iowa. So an I name, despite it not forming in the middle of the season. Again, the 1982 to 1983 El Nino is one of the strongest on record and was, I believe, at the time, the strongest on record, which is insane. This season would be the 5th most active season ever recorded, with the few seasons after this, so 83, 84, and 85, setting even higher records. 83 and 84 are tied for 4th, and 85, I believe, is in the 3rd most active spot right now. Note that Iowa was at the time the costliest to affect Hawaii and also Hawaii's 6th wettest system. Nowadays, in the current time right now, also known as when I'm recording this, Iowa is one of the costliest, and I believe still the 6th, although it might be like around 10th. I forgot to look that up. I'm sorry. Iowa would also have its name retired, being one of only 4 Central Pacific storms so far to have its name retired. And that, folks, is all that I have for the 1982 East Central Pacific season. With Iowa causing the extinction of a whole heckin' bird, screw Iowa, man, that's rough. And Paul just being an absolute monster while it's not even named yet is truly terrifying. I hope that you all learned something from this video. I certainly did while researching it, and that is that the Pacific is weird with the amount of data collected, but I digress. I hope to see you guys in the next one, and I thank you all so much for watching.